Hey guys, welcome to AMA 6. We're going to discuss our packaging in this one because we've had a lot of questions about mainly triggers, but also the containers and the different closures that people are buying. There's a little bit of confusion and there's also there are some problems, and we're going to go through troubleshooting which bottle is used, why it's used, the materials, the closure types, the trigger types, why we've chosen them, how we make them or source them. Everything. I hope you enjoy it. We'll start with the most popular packaging we have. The most popular product we have is body shampoo. Body shampoo arrives, like most of our chemicals, in a 500ml bottle. Pop top enclosure. And you can order it with the optional orange trigger. These particular bottles are also sold separately, so if you want to purchase them, we have customers purchase them simply because they want empty bottles like this at home, but usually because they're replacing them they're replacing the old or damaged ones with new ones. If there's anything other than water in here, if there's any chemical in the container, make sure you label that container, and the best way to do that is to purchase the labels. If your manufacturer allows you, we do allow you to purchase labels. They're $1, I think, and you can whack that on there, and that has all the information, the proper directions of use, and any safety information that might be required. From a safety point of view, that's really a smart thing to do, and it's not very costly or difficult to do that. Now, these bottles are designed and manufactured by us. Any packaging that's designed or manufactured by us will be marked accordingly. This trigger, we chose this trigger. Initially, it was an Italian company that we were buying the trigger off. Now we make these triggers. They're not our design, but we manufacture them for us. And we like these because they're very, very comfortable to use. If you're a detailer using these every day, there's something about this style of trigger, the way that your hand sits in here and wraps around here, that distance from there to there, and the shape here and the shape here, the way that this trigger is rounded. It's got some texture to the front of it, so it's grippy. So when you do have chemicals all over your hands, or usually gloves, you can use the trigger without it being annoying. They are extremely reliable with a failure rate of less than 1%. However, like pretty much anything, any packaging, and almost anything, they can break, and there are some weaker points, and the weakest point on these triggers is the neck. Usually, almost always, what happens is as you tighten that down, there's a little gasket inside the trigger, and as you tighten it down, you want that gasket to just seal on the top of the neck of the bottle, and you don't need to over torque it. Usually, when this trigger fails, it fails because the collar has been over tightened on the neck of the bottle. You only need about 5 Newton meters of torque. That's a very, very light amount, even by hand, to compress that gasket down and make a nice seal on top of the neck. Any more torque is useless, and you'll actually start to break the product. This is plastic and that's plastic, and they're joined together with another piece of plastic. They're designed to be as cheap as possible, but we haven't cheapened out completely, but we've tried to get the trigger down to a point where it's viable, really. People don't want to overpay for the product, and since the trigger has to come with the product, we have to keep an eye on those costs. Also, any more plastic that we put into the product makes that trigger heavier, and it gets significantly heavier quickly. That affects balance, so we want to make sure that this trigger doesn't weigh any more than it has to, and we like this trigger and this bottle. They've designed together, they're designed to work together, and the weighting of everything, this should have chemical inside, but even when the chemical gets low, the weighting is such that it won't easily tip. The more chemical you have in the bottle, the harder it is to tip over. Most bottles you'll find on a shelf are really tall, and you'll notice that ours is what we call a squat. It's designed that way so it doesn't fall over. Tall bottles are designed to stand out on a shelf and dwarf other products and encourage you to subliminally find and purchase them. It looks like you're getting more product because it's a bigger bottle. A 500ml bottle, which usually mostly 500 mils, a 500ml bottle that's squat like this is exactly the same amount as one that's twice as tall but half the width. And while we'd like to make a bottle that's taller, that stood out on the shelf better, we eventually went for, and always have for the last 15 years, have gone for a squat bottle because it doesn't tip over. And that's what a detailer wants, is something that won't fall over and roll down the driveway, unscrew as it's rolling, and empty all the chemical in it. Back to the trigger, if you over torque the collar on the neck, you'll see a separation between the head and the collar. It will start to separate here. So this gap here that's almost nil will start to grow. If you see that, then you have over tightened the collar. It could be a manufacturing defect. So before you fit the trigger to the bottle, just check that the head and the collar have a nice tight fit here. And then when you do screw it on, make sure it's just tight enough for that gasket to compress. You're not over torquing it and you're not causing separation between the collar and the head. The other very, very rare instance is that the adjustment knob here, which is you can turn all the way, and again, just doesn't have to be turned too tight. You turn it all the way to block the orifice and essentially close the trigger and stop it from accidentally dispensing liquid to a fine mist and a very, very controlled amount of spray and pattern, all the way to something that will spray a stream. This is the trigger that gives you the most control. So it's ergonomically the best. It's very, very light. It's a little bit cheaper than our other trigger, and it has more control. So this is the trigger that I prefer to use every day. If I have to, I just replace them because they're not very expensive when I have to, and I find I have to replace them every half a dozen refills. I tend to bash them around. I don't really care what the trigger costs. I am more concerned about doing my job efficiently, doing my job fast, and making the trigger last another 2 or 3 refills. And like all final inspection products, they're designed by professional detailers for professional detailers. So our priorities that go into making packaging have come on the back of daily use of this packaging. If and when we find we need to make a change, we can make that because we can now, the last 8 years or so, design packaging in-house. If you're using this bottle for paint pampering body shampoo, then it's our strong recommendation that you get the pop top. The pop top is a much more reliable solution. Twisted on with just a mild amount of torque, it does make a seal to stop it from leaking. And this mechanism being much more simple means that failure rate is even less again. I think we've sold tens of thousands of these and hadn't had any reports of a single one breaking. I'm sure there is one that's broken, just customers haven't reported it. We prioritize spending more money and giving you a quality closure because there is nothing worse than chemical spilling and ending up on materials that you don't want it to be. It's usually sticky. It's a bit of a mess to clean up. It's a horrible, horrible thing, and we understand that. So we don't want you to have that frustrating experience, and we will spend generally a little more time, effort, and cost to give you a quality closure. Having said that, again, just like the trigger, not just like the trigger is more prone to failure, has more points of failure. The pop top is still susceptible to failure. If you drop it and bang it around enough, if you use it enough, it will wear and it'll eventually fail. So my recommendation is to just keep an eye on it, and my recommendation for changing this out would be every 20 or 30 refills. It might not be beneficial to all, but for me, this particular package is more compact when it has the pop top than the trigger. So you can fit this in places you can't fit this. This is also even less susceptible again to toppling over. For those that are wondering, this is a PET bottle. It's completely recyclable, and it is very, very, very stable with every chemical that Final Inspection manufactures. Next up is our 275ml bottle. This is used for Royal Satin, our tie dressing. It's also used for 275ml samplers of our polish range. And again, these are sold separately with and without its enclosure. The enclosure we use for this is another pop top. Very, very reliable solution, very compact, not very expensive, very simple, and just does its job very, very well. Again, apply the closure to the neck without over tightening it. It makes a seal, and as long as it's made that seal, you don't need any extra torque to make a better seal or to stop it from unscrewing itself. It's very, very unlikely that this will unscrew itself from the bottle because unlike a trigger, it doesn't really have anything protruding from the packaging edge that can spin the closure around. If you don't need a trigger, It's my recommendation always to get this type of enclosure because it's much more reliable. This is another PET bottle. It is recyclable. It's manufactured in Australia. Probably our second most popular packaging is our 1 litre refill. This comes with a closure that isn't a dispenser. It has a gasket and it has a tamper evident seal. When we apply the closure at the factory, the tamper evident seal falls below this ridge, and then as you unscrew the closure, it breaks the portion of the plastic below the ridge, and that's the evidence that you're the first person to open this container after it's left Final Inspection's factory. These are very, very robust containers, and in 20 years of Final Inspection delivering chemicals to customers, we haven't had a single customer return a negative experience using these packages, so we'll stick with these. These are HDPE and they're made in Australia. Another trigger you'll find is this very, very popular, not Final Inspection designed Swan neck trigger. This trigger is designed for our 250 to 275 ml PET clear. And you'll find it on our amber 250 to 275 ml bottles for full metal jacket spray wax, for leather feed, for car cologne, etc. Another very, very reliable trigger, although we have had some customers report failures. Usually the number one issue we have with these is customers that say, my trigger won't pump. It just won't work. And that's because it is kind of difficult to see, especially if you haven't used trigger the first time. It has a little switch here that you have to flick across so you can enable the product to pump. Then flicking it back locks the trigger so it can't dispense any chemical. Very, very useful, very handy, very easy to use. You can use this single-handed. Really nice little design feature, but I will admit that it's tricky to see that the first time you've used this product. The other issue with these is the dip tube. The dip tube's very, very thin, and the end of the dip tube can butt itself up to the wall of the container, and when it does that, it creates a vacuum, so it's no longer sucking chemical up the dip tube. To do it, obviously remove the trigger from the container, cut the dip tube, cut it on a sharp angle so that the end of the dip tube is far less likely to make a seal with the wall of your packaging and create that vacuum issue. Unfortunately, sometimes you'll have what's common across manufacturing in general, and that's copy variance. You'll have a product, this is a copy of a master, and you'll have millions of these, and they will be different from each other. This product, this particular trigger, is different to this trigger. They are not the same trigger. These two are copies of a master, and they vary between each other in tolerances and build quality. Even though it's essentially designed to be a disposable product, manufactured at a very low price point, it is very, very well made and has very, very few issues. The issues it does have, which I just mentioned, are easily solved. That is roughly 99%, so almost 100% of the problems we have with these triggers are generally that the customer hasn't seen. It's the first time a customer has experienced this trigger on one of our products and they haven't seen the locking mechanism, or the end of the dip tube has found its way right flush up against that wall and is creating a seal. The second trigger we use is a trigger from the Canyon brand. It's Canyon's black trigger. This has Viton seals. This is more expensive than the orange trigger, so if you are purchasing this from us instead of the orange trigger, you'll notice this is slightly more expensive. It's less ergonomic than the orange trigger. It's actually pretty agricultural, but it is slightly more robust. So if you find that you're hard on your orange triggers and you don't mind spending, I think it's $1 more, you can purchase the Canyon black, and it should prove to be a little bit more reliable if you're very hard on your triggers. You apply it to the container in the same way. Don't over torque the neck. It has a gasket that just has to slightly press down, around 5 Newton meters of torque. It has a thicker dip tube, and on the end of that you've got a coarser filter. So this will allow larger particles to pass through the trigger. The orifice is larger too, so you're outputting more. This is not necessarily a good thing. Some people might say, well, it's got a thicker dip tube and it pumps out more product. And that could mean that you're going through more product or using too much product, especially for products like interior cleanse. These are not designed for that. And I would recommend against using a Canyon trigger for interior cleanse. These come standard with our wheel clean and Jaffa. For good reasons. We need a thicker dip tube for those thicker products, and the trigger lasts a little longer with those more aggressive chemicals. Wheel clean, especially in the cold when it thickens right up, will not work with the thinner dip tube of the FI orange triggers. You'll also find this with Cleanse Strong, which is a fairly aggressive solvent, and the Viton seals inside this trigger allow for that to be sprayed without damaging the trigger. You'll find if you use an orange trigger with Cleanse Strong that the internals will be eaten away by the chemical. It won't last very long. Usually you can get through 100 or 200 mil before the trigger starts leaking, and having Cleanse Strong all over your hands isn't nice. So we use the right solution for the job, and on those few products we have decided to go for the Canyon Black versus the FI orange. I really hope that helps, and I want to let you know that I understand the frustration that's caused when you have a product delivered to you that has either failed or for whatever reason, even if it's something you can fix but you don't know how to fix, isn't working. So you've been delivered your product, you're all excited to use it. I am a consumer, I buy products, and from time to time I'm delivered products that are either dead on arrival or there's an issue that I can solve but I don't know how to solve, and I'm frustrated and kind of disappointed. Then I have to deal with the manufacturer to have a replacement or go through some troubleshooting. Unfortunately, we can't reduce that down to zero, and we do have that down as far as we think we can possibly get it, and we continue. If you know Final Inspection, you know that we never ever stop. We are constantly optimizing all our products and continuing to improve them, but you will from time to time find that there are these issues, and we just hope that this content will help the majority of the very few people that are experiencing those issues to fix them quickly and painlessly, so you don't have to wait for a replacement product to come out from Final Inspection. And that concludes AMA 6. We dedicated this one to packaging. We hope it was helpful or at least interesting. We are looking at upgrading the colors of some of the packaging. We did get some feedback which we are working on, and there is a solution coming for you. So especially for the AG version of Full Metal Jacket Spray Wax, there is a packaging update coming that will solve that issue for you. We're also looking at improving the FI orange triggers. They're the ones that have the highest failure rate. Still very low, but still the highest failure rate. So that's where we're putting most of our effort for the updates. We have no idea what we're going to do to improve it, to solve those issues, but we're trying to figure out what we can do to make that product a little more robust. So that's it. I hope you have a great night. Thanks for watching.